if you may kindly introduce yourself.
Hello, everyone, and thank you, Tino, for this invite. So my name is Jazz Sethi. I'm someone who's living with type 1 diabetes, and I also run the Diabesties Foundation in India. And I'm very happy to be having this chat with you today.
Oh, how cool. You say that you are a person living with diabetes. So maybe people might need to know a little bit, like, what is your connection with diabetes? When were you diagnosed?
Sure. Yes. So I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 13 years old. And that is exactly 13 years ago. In 2009, I was diagnosed, and, my life changed instantly. So I think the biggest connection I have with diabetes is the fact that I'm a person living with it. I have been living with it for 13 years now. And I am on an insulin pump, I'm on a CGM, and I am also currently looping, which I got into just a couple of years ago. But I think more than that, my connection with diabetes is the fact that I really want to make changes in the way diabetes is seen and understood in India and all over the world. And meeting so many people like yourself and just advocates from around the world makes me very hopeful that we have a bright future ahead.
Oh, this is great. You're bringing on like a great subject that we'll get to as we go. So if you may briefly describe the status quo of diabetes care in India, maybe we'll be a little bit interested in that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think India is sort of known as one of the diabetes capitals of the world, just because also we have 77 million people living with type 2 diabetes in the country as well. And with the latest JDRF type 1 diabetes index data that has come out, we've seen some shocking gaps in diabetes care. So we have around 800,000 people living with type 1 diabetes in the country. But more than that, the shocking fact is that 900,000 people with type 1 should be alive. And they're not because of the gaps in care. And I think that is what really embodies the status of type 1 diabetes in our country, is the fact that first, we don't have robust insurance schemes. So everything that we do get is out of the pocket. We have a few government hospitals that do provide free insulin, but it's a very, very basic insulin like, NPH or human or regular. Access to analog insulin is very, very little, and it's all out of pocket. We have a very overburdened healthcare system just because we have so many people and we have very few doctors. There's not enough time and investment given in really explaining people what type 1 diabetes is. And more than that, I think in our country, more than the lack of insulin that is killing us, it is the stigma that is killing us. And it's very, very prevalent, especially in a country like India, where there's so much emphasis given on alternative treatments and other remedies and things like that we've seen some very, very fatal outcomes come out from that. But at the same time, I will not be like the bearer of bad news. We also do have some very good organizations in the country that are working very hard to improve diabetes care. We've got a whole new patient movement that's coming out. We've got incredible doctors in the country as well. It's a mix of both worlds in the country. I think, you've got that one segment which is really struggling just because they're in the rural sectors, they don't have access to insulin, no access to education, no access to technology. But you also have a segment of society that is doing very, very well with that. So I think now the mission and vision is to bridge those two worlds together and make sure that everyone living in the country can get quality care to ensure quality life.
Wow, that's incredible. And just by you mentioning the statistics of people living with diabetes in India, it's just something else. In Zimbabwe, we do not have that. We don't know. We are only using estimates. And I think it's pretty bad because like I've read this thing to say the number of people living with diabetes in India is exactly the number of people, the total population in Germany. And I was like, wow, imagine if it's the entire country living with people needing to buy insulin, the access itself. How will people manage to live? As according to statistics, it is also said that India has a population of more than the entire Africa as a continent, with more than 50 countries. And that's just something else, right? Yeah. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing to make sure that people living with diabetes, with other organizations that are doing everything possible. What are the most common health risks from living with diabetes in India?
Absolutely. I think what you said is so true that, our population is so big. We have, I think, 1.4 billion people. That's more than most continents also, I would say. But the fact is that, like I said, because our country is so widespread in terms of the rural and the urban sectors, I think the biggest risk if you get type 1 diabetes in the country is the basic mode of survival, which is the insulin. Along with that, problem is that a stable access to insulin and a stable access to test strips. And I say stable very cautiously because you might get insulin 1 month, maybe 2 months, but then maybe if it runs out in the government hospital, you can't get it. So there's the basic assurity that tomorrow will be okay. I think that is lacking in the rural segments of our society. So the health risk with that, of course, come to when you have uncontrolled sugars for the first 6-7 years of your life, you are bound to get diabetes complications later on. Right from diabetic foot complications to kidney issues. We have some members in our team who have undergone kidney transplants because their initial years were not taken care of, because there was no education, there was no stable access to insulin, there was no awareness about it. Secondly, like I mentioned before, I think it's not a health risk, but it is a risk in general, is that because stigma is so prevalent and because emphasis on alternative treatments is so, I don't know what the state is in Africa, but over here, we really tend to, as a culture, rely on alternative therapies. So there's this fear of insulin. So anything to make insulin stop, whether it is trying some herbal remedy or trying some yoga poses or whatever. And I always tell my kids that I don't mind you doing anything. You try whatever you want, but never stop your insulin. But that's, I think, a big risk, because when you stop your insulin, you're ending up in DKA, you're getting your complications. And it's very common. It's not like a few people are doing this. Anyone who gets diagnosed with type 1 diabetes in the country, their first question is, what can I do to stop insulin? So I think as a community, as a country, as a fraternity, we need to de-villainize insulin and make it like a friend, like a buddy, like a lifesaver, not like something that you want to search to stop. So I think that's the biggest risk that I see in the communities around me.
You speak with so much passion, and maybe that would lead me to the next question to say about your passion, everything with the people that are influencing. You are a special force. So many people like us, we look up to people like you with everything that you're doing, with the impact that you're creating in this community. So like, what made you to devote your whole career into the diabetes world, advocating for proper access to healthcare, and also trying to make sure that the families living with people living with diabetes, they don't see diabetes as sort of like a threat, but they should live with it? What made you to do that?
Thank you for that question. And thank you for those words, Tina. That really makes my heart so happy. Actually, Diabesties started off as a very personal story. I remember when I was diagnosed when I was 13 years old, I did not get the education that I should have gotten. And I'm very aware of the place of privilege I speak from, that I was, admitted into a private hospital. I got the best care. I have never had to struggle for my insulin. So I was living in my own bubble, so to say, for the first couple of years. But at the same time, I was always a very curious child. So I always wanted to learn more. So I used to go onto YouTube and I used to search for type 1 diabetes. And I used to get boring videos of, doctors sitting and explaining. And for a 13-year-old like me, I was not interested in it at all. So later on, I think about 6-7 years after I was diagnosed, I decided to start a YouTube channel. That's how it started. I said, I want to make a fun YouTube channel for people like me who like to have some, colorful videos and some with music and dance and whatnot. And that's how it started. This was very much me still living in my bubble. Till I started Diabesties, I had not met a single other person with type 1 diabetes. When I had that first meetup, I interacted with people who were not me. When I interacted with their stories, when I understood their struggles, my diabetes became our diabetes. That was the first time that I actually saw that there is such a disparity in reality. I saw that my diabetes is not the same as other people's diabetes, because my situations are different, their situations are different. And the impact that left on me personally, I was standing in a place where I was like, this is so unfair. The only reason I can afford insulin is because I was born into a family that could afford it. If I was born into another family that maybe could not afford it, the story would be very different. I understood the place of inequality. I understood the reality, and that reality shocked me. And that reality did not make me sleep at night. And I was like, there's nothing I can do by just letting it be. I cannot be a bystander over here. So that is the moment I decided to sort of devote my life to this, and at the same time, make it engaging. I've always said that advocacy does not have to be boring. And the fact is that we need to get people who are young and ambitious and passionate to come and tell their stories and make change. And I'm very happy to say that it's the 5th year of the Diabesties Foundation. We've been doing it for 5 years. We've got amazing global partners. We've tried to reach in the interiors of India. There's still a lot of work to do, but I think that we will and we can.
And this is interesting, everything. It's also a good thing to see like people who are actually living in their own bubbles, like you said, people who sort of like who are fortunate enough, they're also getting into their out of their comfort zones to support others, because they know that if they hadn't been in those type of families, they wouldn't be having all these things that they have. If you could maybe say, share like with us your role at Diabesties Foundation.
So I am the founder and the director of the Diabesties Foundation. I started it in 2018, and now, like I said, we've got a team of over 50 people who work at the foundation full time, and they are people who are all living with type 1 diabetes, or they are caregivers of people with diabetes. So my role at the foundation is actually to, steer the mission forward. Of course, my team is incredible. I can't do it without them. So we've got all the heads of different departments, whether it is social media department, projects department, we've got the community outreach, we've got impact management, we've got advocacy management. So the team really works to make sure that the mission and the vision that we decided on is carried forward. I think my role is also to just keep thinking of new things that we can do, lead the team forward in terms of getting new visions, getting new projects, getting new partnerships to make sure that the work continues.
Everything you're doing is getting noticed in the people that are working together with you. You're doing a lot of great work. Thinking of the number of people that are living with diabetes in India, we need so many hands. We need to come up together and create the change that we need. That is it. We need that.
Couldn't agree.
So right now, like, where do you see Diabesties Foundation? Maybe say due to COVID, there was an increase in the number of people living with diabetes. And besides that, like the number of people living with diabetes is just increasing. It's increasing. And we are even surpassing the projected number that is always being put by the IDF. It's always being surpassed before we get to it. So like, where do you see Diabesties Foundation in the next 5-10 years time?
That's such an interesting question, because I don't plan that forward into the future. I think my plans go as far as 3 months. It's always worked that way because it's been very organic. We have very organically grown. I never started thinking that I want to create a type 1 diabetes center. That was never my goal when I started. Like I said, I only started wanting to create a YouTube channel. But the flow and the progression has been so organic that I like to leave it that way. But having said that, I do know areas that I want to focus on. So I think, like I said, I'm very passionate about education and type 1 diabetes education. And I do want that to continue and grow in the next 5-10 years. I want multiple type 1 diabetes dedicated centers all over the country. That is now the biggest vision and mission for the foundation, is to have every city have a dedicated type 1 diabetes center. Because I think that's very crucial to facilitate peer support, to facilitate education, to facilitate access, and to just make people know that they're not alone in this condition and that there are hands that are willing to help. And I think that would be the next 5-year goal for Diabesties.
That's incredible. Organic is always the best. Things will just flow the way it should. That's what we want, right? To make sure that everybody living with diabetes would lead a healthy quality life and not so many complications, because we need to get people educated. Education will always be key, regardless of any other things that we might need to advocate for. I get asked this question a lot, and I thought maybe I would need to hear maybe from your perspective to say, if you get an opportunity to sit or maybe to meet with the policymaker, what would be your biggest request that you'd make?
Yeah, and I think I have thought about this question so much, in so many different ways. Especially in India, we have a very different kind of a government administration, right? So we have a central government and we have state governments. Health is a state subject. So every state has a different health policy, so to say. I think for me, the biggest thing, of course, and I'm not going to say make insulin free, because I think that should be a prerequisite. I'm going to say beyond that, beyond the free insulin bit, I think it would be every government hospital should have a dedicated type 1 diabetes wing. It should have a dedicated type 1 diabetes team. And I think for me, that would be the first bit of policy that I would like to preach in, because insulin should be free. That is not even something that I want to argue on. That's not something that anyone should even debate on. But beyond that, I would want every government hospital in the country to have a dedicated type 1 diabetes team and wing, and people who are living with type 1 diabetes should be employed in those wings so that they can also help other people who are just like them. They should also be, because lived experience for me is the biggest sort of connector between people. So for me, that would be my ask for policy makers.
And then we say nothing about us without us. It's
Nothing
incredible.
about us without us. Yes,
Right.
preach.
Wonderful. Now, as the diabetes online community and as the entire diabetes community or the international diabetes community, so if we could come up together to advocate for one thing at a time, what would you suggest that we should all come up together to advocate for? Maybe because I know, like, if we come up together with the one voice, I think we can achieve something because the voices will be heard. What do you think, like, what do you suggest we should maybe advocate for to see to its realization?
I think in the current state of what our world is, I would say access to insulin being a very crucial bit. And it's so unfortunate that we have to advocate for it. It's something like, in my mind, it's common sense. It's like 2 + 2 is 4. It's like if you're diagnosed with type 1, you should get free insulin. It's that common sense in my mind, but it's not common practice in so many countries around the world. And I do know that there are places where it's great health management, and maybe we use them as examples, as case studies. But that one voice should advocate for free insulin, and it should advocate for quality type 1 diabetes education. Because I always say this, that I can always give a child a vial of free insulin, but that child's management could still be terrible because they just don't know what to do with that insulin. So it's not about, if I give you a new phone and you don't know how to use it, you're not going to be able to use it. So it's the same way. I can give you a free insulin, but if I don't know what to do with insulin, how to take it correctly, how to carb count, I could still have very uncontrolled sugars. So for me, the free insulin works hand in hand with the free quality education.
Just like that.
Just like
Yes.
that.
Thank you. Thank you. Right. This is interesting. And I like how the conversation just flows naturally. So I don't know, do you have an issue in Zimbabwe, not just in Zimbabwe, but in Africa, maybe say 95% people have never had access to the CGM nor the pump. Is there an issue in India with regards to these devices?
Absolutely. Like I said, see, India is, there are two sides of India, right? One is that the extremely wealthy side, which can afford anything in the world. And then we have a side that is completely below poverty line. And then we have a middle that struggles to, it's neither here nor there. So I would say the same. I think 90% of India type 1 diabetes population are not on any kind of technology. They're on the basic MDI and test strips. In our organization, I can tell you that maximum people, the most that they would have would be a Freestyle Libre Pro, which is the blinded FGM. I think that also it's very expensive to afford. And like I said, because we don't have any schemes, it's not covered. So it's all out of the pocket. And when you live in a family that has to support children, has to support education, has to support electricity, food, this becomes an added thing. It becomes a luxury, unfortunately. Diabetes technology, unfortunately, is considered a luxury in India when it shouldn't. It should be, what, as you said, it should be a necessity, but it's considered a luxury. That's the reality. And it will only change, I think, when there's more competition, when there are more companies that are producing these kind of technologies, maybe made in India, made in Africa, I don't know. But we require something to come and really change it up and get them at competitive pricing so that people can use it as a necessity and not aspire to it as a luxury. Like, it should be, diabetes technology should be like a normal bag that you buy. It should not be a Louis Vuitton bag, that we all want but can't afford.
Thank you so much for sharing all those nitty-gritties with the passion. I mean, you're a person living with diabetes. You know how it is. You've felt it. You've used diabetes technology. You know how impactful it is, because you're always, like, when you have a CGM, the blood sugars you always have, you know how it's going to be affected when you eat this, you know how it's going to rise, you know when it's going to drop, that kind of a thing. It's like you have a mirror, you know everything. You can see, like, you're in the light, a room full of light. You will see, like, what is approaching. Unlike in the case when you have to prick for every time, you might not have the strips. So it'll be difficult for you to manage diabetes when you don't have those kind of things. What advice would you give to the people that are going to listen to this, the people living with diabetes, the caregivers? I mean, because you work with these people, it's Diabesties Foundation. So for the people that are going to watch this episode,
I think I always like to say that with type 1 diabetes, it may be a bad day, but it's not a bad life. I wish I knew that when I was growing up. And I also wish people knew that they're not alone in this condition. I know that when you're diagnosed with a chronic condition, it brings upon a very overwhelming sense of loneliness. You feel like you're the only one in the world who's injecting and pricking and this and that, but you're not alone. You are supported, you are loved, you are heard. And on the days when it feels like it's too much, on the days when it feels like you want to give up, I remind myself that it's a bad day, but it's not a bad life. And I think with peer support, with community, with more education, I think you can not just survive, but really, really thrive with type 1 diabetes. And got to keep going upwards and onwards and be strong, go strong and make other people strong with you.
Thank you so much. This is priceless, priceless. Maybe the last thing, who would you want to give a shout out to? What would you want to say? Your last words, your last words. These are not words of advice, but they're last words.
I think the last was like, this is our tagline of Diabesties, and it says that you are type 1 of a kind. So always remember that you are type 1 of a kind. Know that your voice matters. I feel like a lot of people ask me, I really want to make a difference, but I don't know where to start. And the only advice that I tell them is that, your voice is important, and making change does not have to be big. You start by helping one other person. You start by making one person aware. And that is more than a lot of people have done. So raise the profile, just use your voice, just start your circle of influence, because your voice really, really does matter. And your voice is collectively adding on to all the other voices that can become an anthem. So if you want to do something for diabetes, if you want to advocate, just start by raising the profile, start by being confident about yourself, celebrate yourself, because I think that I don't personally like when people say that, like I said, advocacy does not have to be boring. And I feel like you have to start by celebrating yourself to be able to advocate for yourself. I don't think you can advocate without celebrating. If you celebrate yourself as the person you are and the strength that you have, only then can you advocate for yourself. So for me, it is celebrate and advocate. There's not either or, it's both and. You can do both together.
I'm out of words. So yes, I'm a man of words. This was amazing. I cannot thank you enough. The diabetes community will not be able to thank you enough for everything that you've just said. Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Thank you for the invite, and it's always such a pleasure talking to you. And I'm so happy that we met. Continue the work you're doing, and you always have a friend in me.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Likewise. Let's continue to advocate for proper access to healthcare, things that you should not be advocating for, but we have to. We are forced to do so because things are not okay. So yeah, let's do what. Continue shining the light and influencing others so that they can also do something. Thank you so much for the priceless advice. Wonderful.
Thank you.